what they're doing at the moment is they're curtailing the electricity. They are paying the solar farms, they're paying the wind farms to turn off, which is ridiculous. And so here, then along comes the Bitcoin mining container and says, hey, we'll take as much electricity as you can give us as long as the price is right.
This is a foundational transformation we see happening in the economy.
DeFi and blockchain are redefining business, the economy, and our society. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Redefined. I'm so excited to talk about today's guest. I'm Jeremy Allman, your co-host, here with my good friend Megan Guy.
How you doing, Jeremy? I am excited. We've got, I think, a really interesting conversation today that picks up on some threads from my past as well as yours. I came out of the environment and climate and sustainability space, as many of our listeners know. And I'm excited because we have with us today Rachel Geyer from Terahash, who's been doing some really interesting stuff in that area.
Hi. Well, thanks very much for the invitation, first off. I work for Terahash Space, which is a really exciting German startup. We're carrying out a lot of research into Bitcoin mining, particularly in combination with renewables. I also serve on the board of the European Bitcoin Energy Association, which Terahash started off. So I'm very much involved in Bitcoin mining. And I'm also the mother of 4 children. And I always like to put that in because, in my opinion, that's the most important job in the world, and I'm the most proudest of what I've done there.
I love it. You bring like a whole view, and we're going to probably talk about like a bunch of the projects you're in. One of the things that I think will be fun to start off with, is we often talk about like the real use cases, and today is going to be a fun conversation about mining and renewable and energy, and the firm you work for kind of got started in a non-traditional way. So you guys didn't start off as like Bitcoiners and let's go mining, but you actually started off with a traditional family business in a traditional space, right?
So Terahash is actually a part of a group of companies which was founded just after the Second World War in the back of a garage, as it so often is. So it was the grandfather of the guy who's CEO at the moment, Chris Klager. The group is called the Klager Group. And they have 3 factories. One of them is producing cosmetics. One of them is over in East Germany producing car parts. And the third one produces very high quality plastic spraying technology. And so it was a business which uses an awful lot of energy and an awful lot of heat. And as we all know, Europe's suffering at the moment with the price of electricity. So when things were getting really bad, Chris Klager thought, he just understood Bitcoin and he just understood what Bitcoin mining was. And then he thought, hey, what about if I put a couple of miners down in the cellar of the factory where we make the cosmetics, and we can run the water through these miners, put it into our big boiler and use that heat to test our cosmetic products. And so then we founded Terahash, Terahash.energy, because then we thought, well, wait a minute. If we're a company who needs a solution like this, there's going to be many companies out there who needs a solution like this. At the beginning, it was predominantly the Bitcoiners who would say, I've got a little bit of solar on my roof. Can I put a miner in my basement? And now we talk to multinational energy companies who are understanding the need for Bitcoin mining. So it's exciting to see the transition. I firmly believe that this is the way that we're going to get Bitcoin into Europe, through the solutions it brings to the energy transformation or the energy crisis that we have. It won't be, first off, as a money solution.
That's incredible. I'm like, my mind's blown, like, using it for heat for the manufacturing organization. My day job, a lot of our customers are manufacturing customers, and it's probably non-obvious where they would interact with something like mining. So maybe can you unpack a little bit of like how that works, right? That's a wild thought to go like, wait, we have a basement, we have boilers, we need heat, and let's just use mining as some kind of, economically efficient way to engage.
What I should have added is that we have a lot of solar on the roof. Then it maybe makes a lot more sense so we have solar on the roof that we use for our own production. But of course, we don't produce at the weekend. We don't produce in the holidays. So there are times when you've got a lot of excess energy that you don't need for your production. Obviously, at times where there is no sun we don't mine because it's just not economically viable to take it out of the plug. And then if I look across to the plant that we've got in East Germany, we've actually just set up an enormous solar park next door to it, which is providing us with twice as much energy as we need for our production of the car parts, because we knew that we could use that surplus energy for a container of miners that we've got there. That's not to say it's easy. This is not a solution everywhere. You have to look at every single business on a case by case. How much excess energy have they got? How much do they need? How much heat do they need? It's a tight market. It's a global competition, this Bitcoin mining. So it's hard to make it economically viable. But if you're using the heat as well, so if you're not just mining the Bitcoin, for us, the Bitcoin mining is a nice to have, but it's not really what we're going for. We're really going for the heat. And that then makes it that you can have electricity prices higher than the rest of the world, which is just mining Bitcoin, and you can still be competitive with your mining.
Rachel, are you seeing most of the folks who are doing mining in Europe, is it being paired with renewables? Has that story kind of gotten out? Because I think the early days of Bitcoin, a lot of the conversation was about how incredibly energy intensive that became. And, Bitcoin mining was taking up as much energy as some small countries, right? Maybe give us a little bit of a flavor for the policy too in Europe, because I think that's it's a very different conversation, I think, that you guys are having there than we've had in the US.
I wouldn't know one European Bitcoin mining company that's mining with anything other than renewable energy, because it's just not worth it. The only place that I know in Kazakhstan, they do some Bitcoin mining with coal, but that is because the government subsidizes the coal. And if the government wasn't subsidizing the coal, it wouldn't be economically viable for Kazakhstan to be mining with coal-fired power stations. So in Europe, most of the mining is going on in the Scandics countries, and that's predominantly hydro. We're still largely in the stage of pilot projects making this work. I'd be lying if I was saying we have these big scale mining going on. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. So you see pilot projects going on that will then be scaled up when we can make it economically viable. But I think the most interesting project that we've got on at the moment, or we're building at the moment, is happening in Finland, where we've got 1 megawatt of hydropower, and from the Bitcoin mining we're doing there, we are powering 12,000 houses with their heat all year round. So their hot water and their heat. And I think that Europe is going to have to be a lot more innovative than the rest of the world, because we do have extremely high electricity prices. So we can't compete with Saudi Arabia or Paraguay or Ethiopia. We are going to have to eke every last bit of energy out of those miners, which means using the heat or having a second income source to make your Bitcoin mining viable. You see, Europe's trying to become more renewable. And so we're doing quite well. We do have a lot of sun and we do have a lot of wind, but that makes additional problems for our grid operators, because you have to keep the grid at 50 hertz. It's got to be kept stable at all times. And that's quite an easy thing to do if you've got a coal-powered plant, or you've got a gas-powered plant, because you can turn the coal and the gas up and down as required with the demand. When you're using renewables, you don't know when the sun's going to shine, you don't know when the wind is going to blow, and it tends to all happen often at the time when you don't need the electricity, because you've got the sun in the middle of the day. And I think, the curve of usage for electricity is what we call a duck curve. You have high usage in the morning, you have less in the middle of the day, you have high in the late afternoon, the evening, and this is the exact opposite of when you have your solar power. And so the grid operators in Europe have got a massive problem to keep their grid stable. So what they're doing at the moment is they're curtailing the electricity. They are paying the solar farms, they're paying the wind farms to turn off, which is ridiculous. And so here, then along comes the Bitcoin mining container and says, hey, we'll take as much electricity as you can give us, as long as the price is right.
Yep.
The narrative of Bitcoin mining up till now has been predominantly it's dirty and it's killing the environment. Fortunately, this narrative is changing. There's been some great reports coming out from KPMG and other institutions. There's great work going on to show that this is not the case, but it's taking time to trickle down to the energy companies. And that's where we're doing is spending a lot of our time educating them on the potentials.
I think one of the things that's really interesting that you're touching on is how economic incentives actually can drive towards more productive, more renewable, and more efficient sort of energy infrastructure. And mining actually plays a role. The miners are, validating the network. So now you have a financial network that's being validated by, hopefully a more energy, renewable infrastructure. Then that energy infrastructure in Europe, you're saying, just sort of by policy needs to be more renewable by definition, but that drives the cost up. So for you to actually be competitive, what you're saying is you're driving any excess energy and you're absorbing it, and then you guys are able to reuse it, and maybe in dual use, you can reuse it both to mine and then to drive heat. And then that heat, well, it could be not used, or you guys could capture it and not only sort of absorb the energy, but you also can then reuse the heat for a bunch of things. So that's an incredible circular, economy in its own right, right?
It's beautiful. And it produces, one kilowatt in, you get the same amount of heat out. You lose very, very little through the process of mining, very, very little. So you've basically got a one-to-one conversion into heat. So it would be foolish not to use that. And I mean, the thing is, Jeremy, as we all know, if it's not economically incentivized, policy doesn't drive the economy. Economic incentives drive the economy. So if we really want to get cracking on renewables and all the rest of it, we need an economic incentive in order to do so. And I mean, you see this is another beautiful use case of Bitcoin mining. So if I want to build a solar farm, I've obviously got huge capex costs before I can get that electricity onto the grid. And in Europe, it takes on average 7 years for all the permits and all the requirements for that electricity from that solar farm to go onto the grid. So in that 7 years up to that date, they are earning nothing. And then this is where, again, Bitcoin mining can come in and be a beautiful solution. Bitcoin mining it's location agnostic. All it needs is a bit of internet, and it doesn't even need a lot of internet, but it needs a bit of internet. So your miners can go to the solar farm, and until the time that that farm can feed into the grid, it's got a customer who will take all the electricity that it can give that customer as long as the price is right. But for that solar farm, anything's better than zero. So they're quite happy to pay less. And then the beauty of this is they can actually then afford to build out even more renewables because they've got a customer of first instance, who will take everything that they can give. And so then you've got this economic incentive for the solar farms and the wind farms to overscale their production because they know that they can sell it off. And then the minute that electricity can go into the grid and can go to a customer who will pay more, the mining container packs up and moves to the next.
How has it been talking to the policymakers now and educating them on, sort things like grid build out and, sort of future forward? Because, I think a lot of us believe that even outside of just pure Bitcoin, in technology build out and the advancement of society, sort of having more energy infrastructure is one of the biggest things we can do to invest in our future. So how has the conversation been with, policymakers and government leaders around this segment?
We're certainly not as far as you are in America. I look across to your Dennis Porter and we follow it all, what's going on with your Satoshi Action Fund and the Texas blockchain. They're doing fantastic work. We're not quite as far as they are, but we're getting there. And the work predominantly happens behind the scenes, and that's where it needs to happen. So I mentioned earlier that I'm on the board of the European Bitcoin Energy Association, and we actually set that up and took a long time to put the board together because we knew we had to have the right people sitting on the board. There's no point having a passionate Bitcoiner sitting there, talking all about the benefits of Bitcoin and trashing the system that we've got. You need to have somebody sitting at the table who speaks the same language as the European politicians, as the European regulators. So one guy who's sitting on the board, he works at the European level on regulation for the energy markets. Then we've got somebody who's working on MiCA, which is the financial regulations that they're trying to get around crypto, including Bitcoin, because they lump it all together. We've got somebody on the board who worked together on the European Green New Deal a decade ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they all understand Bitcoin mining 100%, and they speak the language of Europe. And that way you find that people are more inclined to listen to you. And the other thing that you have to remember is politicians are just people. They are just normal people. And
Wait. That's a clip. Politicians are normal people.
I find it incredible when you talk to the people who are actually making the decisions on the regulations and you realize they haven't got a clue what they're regulating on. They can't possibly have a clue on what they're regulating on because they've probably got, 10 bills crossing their desk that morning, and you cannot know. I know how long it's taken me to understand Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. It's taken me a couple of years of extremely intense research. We all know how these bills are written. The bills are written by the companies who are most invested in getting the decision that they want, and then they get signed off or they don't get signed off. And this is one of the big problems that we have got, that there's money at the EU level to promote all the other cryptocurrencies, because all the other cryptocurrencies have got a company or something behind them and a CEO, and there's a lot of money in it. And so they're obviously there with their vested interests to talk up the rest of the cryptocurrencies and talk down Bitcoin. And nobody's talking for Bitcoin because there is no company and there is no CEO. So this is the first thing. We don't have the funding that the other big cryptocurrencies do have, but we have tenacity, and we have passion, and I think we've got the right people sitting around the table having the conversations. We had a conversation just yesterday with an absolutely wonderful European member of Parliament who happened to go to Riga, which is a hardcore Bitcoin conference. I mean, it's a wonderful conference. And a 60-year-old lady who goes to Riga, she gets Bitcoin. And she, in fact, she connected with us, wanting to know more about what the work of EBEA is. The other place that we're working together with is University of Cambridge. So they're the ones who produce the data at the moment that most of the world lives on when it comes to Bitcoin mining and the energy sources which are powering Bitcoin mining. Most people refer to the Centre of Finance, University of Cambridge. It's a lovely guy running that, a lovely guy. He's got a really hard job because he cannot get the data from the Bitcoin miners because Bitcoin miners will not give the data. And this is a problem that we're having with EBEA. We are fighting with the pools, give us the data, because the regulators want to see what's going on. And if we can show them with the data that, this really is 75%, 80% renewable, and there's no other market that's using so much renewable, but the miners are very suspicious. They're worried about putting their head above the parapet. They don't want to be stand up and be counted in case then measures come to shut them down. So this is where we have a slight advantage because we are miners, and so we have a very good network. And this is something that we're extremely interested in with Terahash. We're not interested in get rich quick solutions. And to be frank, there's been an awful lot of cowboy action going on in Bitcoin mining, and there's still a lot of cowboy action going on with Bitcoin mining. The Scandinavian countries have been quite burned, where companies would come in and then set it all up, and they would promise jobs, and they would promise this and promise that. And then when things got hot and it was no longer viable, they would just disappear. They wouldn't fulfill their contracts. They'd leave their trash behind. And we see it in Paraguay. We see it in Ethiopia. They're not fulfilling the contracts. And this is where we at Terahash are taking a completely different approach. We want to do integrated mining. We want Bitcoin mining to be an asset to the society. So if you can use the heat and do district heating, you're a completely different industry than you just want to mine and get as much Bitcoin as you can. So the more we can get these integrated solutions where companies are using the heat for their production, or communes are using it for district heating, this is where it then becomes a clean business. We are a German company. We're registered in Germany. Anybody who does business with us, so you find that investors are much more happy to invest with us because they know the rule of law applies in Germany. So if anything goes wrong, there's somebody that they can turn to. And I mean, next year we're hoping to do 20 to 40 megawatt projects in Finland.
Wow.
And we want to bring this to Germany. I mean, we want to bring it to the rest of Europe, because if it works in Finland, then we want to be able to make this work in the rest of Europe. So you'll find that there are plenty of investors who would much rather spend a couple more cents per kilowatt to get a reliable, sustainable solution.
You talk about some of the reports that are coming out, which is really early, but some of the newer reports are quite compelling on, incentives are driving more sort of renewable and sustainable views of energy sort of creation. One of the things, though, you were talking about on the policymaker side is, how do you bring in the capital to actually drive the maturing of the industry? And, I'm not sure, Megan, like your thoughts on, it seems to be behind the closed doors. What I'm hearing is a lot of the big ETF funds and folks like that, are looking at the new reports from KPMG and EY, and there's quite a few out there now that are, saying it's maybe the majority is renewable, and they're starting to think about where this might go in a basket of ESG funds. And so, I think there's public capital that you're talking about, Rachel, as we think about, policymakers. There's also private capital when you talk about rule of law and well-established, sort of organizations in this space. And so, Megan, I know you've spent quite a bit of time in both energy and capital, and like, how do you think about maybe ESG funds and like where that may play a role, as more renewable gets driven in here, or are those like completely separate lanes in your mind?
I think they're pretty separate lanes, honestly. And I think, there's obviously a lot of questions and criticisms and politicization, frankly, around ESG funds as a whole at the moment. So, I think throwing crypto and Bitcoin into the mix is like matching a pool of gasoline, right? So yeah, I don't see that being kind of a leading edge case. I do think it's interesting though, from the perspective, just, someone that spent a lot of time, both in the investing world in energy and thinking about the climate transition, but also on the nonprofit side. I think anytime you're kind of broadening the constituency around a technology, and this is bringing in potentially some like, slightly more unusual bedfellows maybe into the conversation about renewables and the importance of renewables adoption and how we drive that. Texas is actually a great example. Texas has a huge amount of renewables. You wouldn't necessarily think that on the face, given the predominant kind of politics and the noise that Texas's current governor makes. But, the fact that that's also been kind of a hub in the US for mining, and some of the conversation here, makes a lot of sense in that context. And so I think it's quite interesting from the perspective just of being able to broaden the set of voices in the conversation and, hopefully generate more support, I think, for some of these, policies that we need to drive better, not only outcomes for the Bitcoin world, but energy outcomes, energy access and equity, and environmental justice concerns that have to date kind of often been the last of the things that get considered as policies crafted. I don't mean necessarily they haven't been considered, but they've not been front and center, and they haven't had strong constituencies necessarily as strong as some of the corporate ones that Rachel, I think you alluded to in Europe.
I think we're going to see a lot of that because, to be honest, Bitcoin mining does tick all the boxes, and you have these enormous funds which have to invest in ESG projects, and here you've got the perfect ESG project. So I actually think that once the facts and the figures show us clearly, then the money from the climate funds are going to come pouring into Bitcoin mining, because why would they not? It's got the potential of being one of the most interesting positives for the environment and for sustainability that we have going for us. I mean, we're in talks with landfill companies in Germany, for the methane mitigation. So you have landfill sites where you have a lot of methane gas coming off it, and at the moment, quite a few of the sites in Germany, I mean, they're not pumping their methane into the air, but they are firing it off. And the trouble with landfill sites is, of course, you can change that methane into electricity, but they usually sit too far away from the grid to be able to feed that electricity into the grid. And so again, here's another use case. Along comes your Bitcoin miner. It can plonk itself down on a landfill site. There's no people involved. Computers don't mind where they're sitting. And you can take the methane converted into electricity and use it in the Bitcoin mining. So, and this is all going to need lots of investment money coming into it, because, I mean, the communes haven't got money to put into it. So I think what we're hoping is, when we have our first site up in Finland up and running, and we're collecting the data, and we can show, not tell, because I think it's very important that you can show what you're talking about, not just blurt out the figures, then I think it's going to be extremely interesting for these big ESG investors to say, hey, this is somewhere that I would like to plant my money. I know it's safe. I know it's sustainable. It ticks all the boxes.
Yeah, I think the key though there is, as you said, the data and like the reliability of that, right? And the ability, I think, to connect specific projects back to however that ESG fund, or government or whatever entity is making that investment back to the metrics that they care about in a way that's rigorous. And I think the thing I worry about, because I've seen this happen on the carbon side, thinking about forest carbon and natural climate solutions, which are a huge important piece of the solution to climate change, but which frankly, a lot of bad actors have kind of shot themselves in the foot and given a bad name to the space because the data, was, I don't want to say fabricated, but it was certainly manipulated, I think, in ways that didn't necessarily tell the full story. And as that comes to light, and it turns out that, they call it sort of hot air in the space, that the numbers that were being reported aren't the actual mitigation numbers that we've seen. It's really undermined the whole space, including, projects that are doing things really well and that we frankly need to come online. So I think getting the whole of the industry, committed to transparency around the data and to audits and all those sorts of things that make us feel really good that what we're investing in is delivering what it says, is, I think, super important. So, the work you're doing to kind of help lead that and form, the early stages of an industry association focused on the environment piece, I think is incredibly important to bringing more capital into the space.
We've actually got a research lab. I mean, that sounds quite grand, but it's down in our cellar where we started off. But we have the different, you have the air-cooled miners, you have the hydro miners, the water-cooled miners, and you have the immersion miners, so the miners that you put in the immersion fluid to keep them cool. And the purpose of that is literally for that light bulb moment to go off. And it's exactly what happened to me the first time I went along to the company. I'd never seen Bitcoin mining in action, and you have a picture in your mind, and you walk in there, and I think the fact that it's called mining is negative, because you've got this connotation of something very dirty. And you see we've had plenty of media and plenty of politicians coming in, and you say, put your hand there, it's the cold water pipe, and they're going through the machines, and here it comes out warm, and it's just going through these computers. And I mean, these computers are actually, a couple of years ago, you didn't have the hydro miners on. It's all new, it's changing all the time. So we actually took the air cooled, and we transformed them into hydro And now we've got beautiful racks of those hydro computers that look like a completely normal server center. And so the people come in and they see, well, wait a minute, that's just a data center. That's all it is. So it's called Bitcoin mining. That's a little bit misleading because all it is a data center. And it's a very flexible data center, and that therein lies the advantage of a Bitcoin data center over any other kind of data center, because there's no customer for a Bitcoin data center. Unlike if I'm Google, I've got my customers who are doing their Google searches, or if I'm Netflix, I've got the people wanting to watch their films. I can't turn those data centers on and off at will. But with Bitcoin, there's no customer. And so that's what makes Bitcoin data centers such a valuable tool for energy grid providers, because you've got this great big consumer of energy that I can turn on and off as needed.
Yeah, and I'd almost say it's in one sense it's data center, which is like kind of nice for folks to kind of wrap their head around, that it's not some crazy black box. On the other hand, because it can be used on demand, has economic incentive, and can be, one way to think about Bitcoin is a stored energy, right? So it has a bunch of very unique properties that are different than, say, an AI data center that might just absorb energy and just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and not necessarily have some give back to the community. And so but I think you're right, like people seeing it matter. It's sort of like we say this a lot in the industry, right? You don't trust, you verify. So touching these things are important.
Yeah, they don't do themselves any favors calling it mining.
No,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
don't. We really don't.
yeah.
So, in fact, we called it an energy lab. We call it an energy lab. We don't call it a Bitcoin mining lab. And we always talk about Bitcoin data centers. And and you don't even need to use the word Bitcoin. Just call it a data center, because that's all it is.
Exactly.
And you have to work out with your customer, how much do they need to know? Because what's their problem? So if they've got a problem which they've got excess energy and they want to get rid of their excess energy, and you come along and you say, I've got this solution, I will take all your excess energy, they don't even need to know that it's Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you find that some of the customers, they don't want to touch the Bitcoin. They think that it's too complicated. They don't want to have anything to do with it. So, so they would prefer that we just put the miners there and they give us the electricity, and potentially we sell the heat back to them. They don't actually want to touch the black box in the middle.
Yeah, and we found this in our own business that, in those cases, it may be engaging in Bitcoins too early, but understanding, this is part of the financial network infrastructure and the open financial network. That there are certain concepts that are, I'd say corporate America is starting to engage in. And, I think this is a really healthy spot in the industry. And maybe one of the last areas I'd touch on, because what Megan said earlier when we were talking about like, what's important is bringing in, new constituents, whether it's, parts of, the corporate, commercial, or institutional constituents, or policymaking constituents. That's really exciting. It's a big change to me that didn't exist for 5, 6, 7 years ago. The other though, which I'm probably not even qualified to ask about, but I think your other final hat, Rachel, you do many things, is you have a community of I think it's called the Femme Orange, which is women in Bitcoin, which is a different set of constituents that you've been sort of very active in driving. And so I'd love to kind of maybe end on that part, because that's really fun, and actually how I got to know you, even though I have the wrong chromosome for that.
I know. I tell you, it's called Les Femmes Oranges, which is the orange women in French. When I first started going to Bitcoin conferences, I was nervous going in. My very first one was in Switzerland. It was called the Citadel, and it was full of these very young developers. And I walk in there and I go, oh, what am I doing there? I'm grey-haired old rat bag. What am I doing with all these young men? I had the best weekend. Honestly, it was fantastic. They were so delighted to see me. They were so delighted to have a woman there, and they were very, very friendly. And the more I went to, I was thinking, where are the women? Where are the women? Because for me, Bitcoin is made for women. The beauty of Bitcoin as a money is I just need to save it. I can forget all about that financial. What do I need to invest in? I can have my Bitcoin and I can save it for a rainy day, which suits me down to the ground that I don't have to think about my strategy so much of my investment strategy. And the other thing that worries me is I believe that Bitcoin is going to be the next money. Nobody knows what the future is, but I believe that it is. And if this is the case, we know that 98% of it, and I'm making that figure up, but it must be something like that, is in the hand of men. And I don't know whether that's going to be a very healthy society.
This is an area I would say, as we wrap, like a lot of your common theme through this, right, is what the work you're doing, and many of us are in Bitcoin, is really about creating a positive future, right? So whether it's in energy or whether it's in community or whether it's socially, right? These are all things that we're investing positively in the future. So much of society right now, when you turn on a movie and it's about technology, it's a dystopian view. And I think, the great hope here, and there's no magic solution, but the great hope here is, this kind of infrastructure can be a version of the future that we get to invest in that's not dystopian, but actually more positive and holistic and community and good for the environment. And so, Rachel, your story has been inspiring. Your company and what you guys are doing is super inspiring. I'm sure people that are listeners are going to be like so curious about more of this because these are a bunch of topics that doesn't often come up. And so where can they find you to follow you, whether it's you or Terahash? Like where do people go to learn more?
I'm not a massive fan of social media because I think life's too short to spend too long scrolling. You need to be actually talking to real human beings. I am on Twitter, and I only went on Twitter because of Bitcoin. I'm Geyer_Rachel. I'm on LinkedIn. The website's Terahash.space is the company I'm working for. EBEA, EBEA.work is the European Bitcoin Energy Association, and lesfemmesamanges.work.
Thank you so much, Rachel. This was an awesome conversation. Great to spend some time with you.
Thanks for inviting me, guys. I enjoyed that.
We are a wrap. Follow us on Redefined on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and wherever else these kinds of podcasts are shown. We'll catch you on the next one. Cheers, guys.